Thank you, Hannah, for your kind introduction. I will talk to you today about the important updates in the monitoring and reporting regulation, primarily on the use of sustainable aviation fuels. Before I dive into this topic, I would like to explain to you some new terms which have been introduced in the monitoring and reporting regulation that are a bit helpful for you during the rest of my talk. So when we talk about alternative aviation fuels, this is actually what you would call SAF, so sustainable aviation fuels. But in the MRR, they're now referred to as alternative aviation fuels. So these are aviation fuels containing carbon other than stemming from fossil fuels. So you can think about biofuels, RFMBOs, recycled carbon fuels, or synthetic low carbon fuels. When we talk about neat fuels, we mean a fuel in its pure form containing only one fraction of fuel. This can be a biomass fraction, a fossil fraction, an RFMBO or RCF fraction, or an SLCF fraction. A mixed aviation fuel is a fuel which contains at least two different neat fuels. So why is this important to you? Well, as you might know, there are two actually incentives in the EU ETS directive that help to promote the use of sustainable aviation fuels or alternative aviation fuels. First of all is when you use your alternative aviation fuels and report this in your emission report, they can be zero rated, which means that you don't have to hand in allowances over this batch of fuel. When we talk about eligible aviation fuels, these are fuels which are eligible for ETS support. This support mechanism is now called feed support, fuels eligible for ETS. And this support mechanism is in place in the period from 2024 till 2030, and it is to cover the price difference between more expensive eligible aviation fuels or sustainable aviation fuels and fossil kerosene. And I will talk about this mechanism a little bit later in my presentation. So what is now important to you concerning these new relevant requirements? So for both the monitoring and the reporting, it's important to determine the fraction of alternative and eligible fuels in mixed fuels. Afterwards, it's of course important to determine then the CO2 emissions stemming from these different fraction of fuels. For both monitoring and reporting, it's important that you prove how you attribute your fuels to different flights. And of course, compliance to RED II criteria is important to prove the sustainability criteria of the batch of fuel. And on the first three items, I will go a little bit into more detail in the next slides with also some examples. So first of all, the determination of neat fuel fractions and the determination of CO2 emissions in mixed fuel. Well, if you burn your fuel in your aircraft, there's CO2 entering in the atmosphere, which is then the total fuel quantity multiplied by the preliminary emission factor. If you use, in this instance, not only fossil fuels, but also, for example, biofuels, you should determine both fractions in the total amount of mixed fuel. This you can determine by multiplying the total fuel quantity of the mixed aviation fuel multiplied by the fraction of fossil fuel and the fraction of biomass. In this example, the biofuel consists of two different fractions again. It's either non-certified biofuels and certified biofuels. These different fractions have to be determined, so you obtain all of the different neat fuel fractions in your mixed fuel. Next, you can determine the CO2 emissions stemming from these fuels by multiplying the total amount of neat fuels by the emission factor. And in case of the zero-rated biomass, this emission factor is 0. So for this batch of neat fuel, you do not have to surrender any CO2 allowances. So putting this a little bit into numbers, here's one example. So an aircraft operator purchased 500 tons of blended Jet A1. This is a mixed aviation fuel at Rotterdam Airport, which contains 25% of RED II certified biofuel and 25% non-certified biofuel. First step you need to do is to determine the neat fuel fraction. So 50% of the neat fuel of the mixed aviation fuel contains of fossil fraction, so that's 250 tons. The biomass fraction is the other half, which is then the other 250 tons. And from the biomass fraction, 50% is non-zero rated, and the other fraction is also 50%, so that's also 125 ton. All of these different fractions need to be reported separately in your emissions report. After that, you can determine the CO2 emissions stemming from the mixed fuel. So and also determine then the amount of emission allowances you need to surrender. So for the non-zero rated biomass fraction, you should just use the emission factor of fossil kerosene. And then you can determine how many allowances you need to surrender after you have handed in your emissions report. Then I would like to go a little bit into detail about the attribution of alternative and eligible fuels to flights. This is important already for your monitoring plan. So in your monitoring plan, you should already choose between different options how the fuel is attributed to flights. So option 1 is that fuels are physically attributed to flights. This means that a truck delivers a specific, can be a blended or neat fuel to the specific aircraft, and the subsequent flight is an EU ETS flight. And evidence for this should be delivered to the competent authority and the verifier by you. The second option, which is in most cases the actual situation, is that there's no physical attribution to flights. This means that the fuel is delivered to an integrated pipeline system at an airport. Then it's important for you to determine the proportionality factor. And what does it mean? Well, this is actually the following formula, which you can see there. So this factor is determined by the emissions of flights from this airport, for which allowances have to be surrendered by the aircraft operator, divided by emissions of all flights departing from this airport. In the next slide, I will also give a little bit of an example how you can determine this factor. There's some criteria to this, so you should provide evidence that the eligible fuels or alternative fuels are delivered to the pipeline system in the reporting period, or 3 months before or 3 months after that reporting period. For both options, it's important to note that any fuel remaining in the tanks after a flight and before an uplift is assumed to be 100% fossil fuel, and that there's a different scope applicable for the use of eligible aviation fuels. In that case, domestic flights from a member state to its outermost regions are included, whereas this is not the case for the use of alternative aviation fuels. So, now I would like to show you an example how the proportionality principle works. If an aircraft operator purchases 100 ton of RED II certified biofuel at Schiphol Airport, from which 100% is a SAF purchase, or it's already determined as a neat fuel from a mixed aviation fuel, this fuel is delivered to a pipeline system. First, the aircraft operator determines the total emissions from flights subject to surrender departing from Amsterdam to be 10,000 tons of CO2. So these are only intra-EEA flights, so covered by the scope of the EU ETS. The total amount of flights departing from Amsterdam, so that's intra-EEA and extra-EEA flights, is determined to be 50,000 tons of CO2. So putting this into this formula, what you get is the proportionality factor of 20%. And in this case, the aircraft operator had purchased 100 tons of fuel, so 100 tons multiplied by 20% is 20 tons of RED II certified biofuels, which can then be reported in your EU ETS report for the scope of your ETS reporting. So the following steps are then to summarize again what is important for you for the monitoring and for the reporting of alternative fuels for the application of the zero rating. At first, it starts by having an approved monitoring plan. And we are still waiting on a new monitoring plan template, which will be published by the European Commission. But we strongly recommend you, or if you did not start already working on it, and if you're planning to use this this mechanism, to start work on your procedures and the relevant documentation required. Then it's important for you to collect the necessary documentation to support this zero emission claim. You can then report the amount of alternative fuels in your annual emission report. And again, the previous things I just explained to you, so the determination of alternative fuel, the alternative fuel fractions, the determination of the total CO2 emissions from the mixed fuel, and the attribution of flights is once again important here. The deadline of the submission of your emissions report is by 31st of March next year, and if compliance is met with the monitoring and reporting regulation, the RED II, and also national legislation, alternative fuels can be zero rated. So as I explained before, it's important to split out these different fuel fractions. So also in cases where you don't have the relevant evidence, which is required for the zero rating of alternative fuels, it's important that you would still report this. An important thing to prove the RED II criteria is the proof of sustainability. And as you might be aware, currently there's this situation in the Netherlands where the fuel supplier already submits the proof of sustainability to the NEA in order to obtain renewable energy units under the RED II opt-in for aviation in the Netherlands. Therefore, the proof of sustainability is unavailable for aircraft operators, since the proof of sustainability can only be issued once. On behalf of the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management, the NEA has implemented a temporary solution from the 1st of January 2024 to the 31st of December 2024 to enable the parallel claim of renewable energy by both the fuel supplier and the aircraft operator. Afterwards, the Union database should take over this function. So what does this solution entail? Well, it's actually that the NEA registry, so where fuel suppliers register their batch of fuels, this can facilitate a link between a batch of fuel by the fuel supplier and a purchased batch of biofuels, which has been reported in your EU ETS reporting. And we have added some links for more information if you want to know more about this temporary solution. So here is a scheme to explain this a little bit more in detail, what we actually expect from you and also from the fuel supplier to make this parallel claim of renewable energy possible. So the proof of sustainability is forwarded through the chain of certified entities. So from the biofuel production, it's handed over to the fuel supplier. And normally then the fuel supplier registered the batch of fuel in the NEA registry and hence in the proof of sustainability to the NEA to receive renewable energy units. In order to make this link, what we ask now from the fuel supplier is some more information to give in. So it's the name of the aircraft operator, a unique batch number as stated on a purchase record, a unique product transfer number as stated on the product transfer document, and consent for sharing data with the ETS verifier and the NEA. The fuel supplier then hands over or delivers the batch of fuel to the aircraft operator. And with this hands over also purchase records and a product transfer document. Aircraft operator then reports in their annual emission report the amount of biofuels and also collects relevant documentation so that the verifier and the NEA is able to link this to the registered batch of fuel. And the information we're asking of you is then a purchase record or a product transfer document stating the proof sustainability number, the purchase record containing unique batch number, and a product transfer or a product transfer document containing a unique product transfer document number. And if this is all okay and compliance is met, the batch of biofuels can be zero rated, you can apply for feed support. This scheme shows the situation in the Netherlands. Oh, as one important thing again. So as you might see, there's some sharing of information. So we want to highlight that it's important that you cooperate with your fuel supplier to collect and receive the required documentation. And as I just said, this showcases the situation in the Netherlands, but for fuel deliveries outside the Netherlands, and where you do not receive a proof of sustainability, you should retrieve an extract from a national registry containing also the relevant information so that it's able to make this link again and to enable the parallel claim of renewable energy. Prior to publication, to official publication of this new regulation, we already would like to explain a little bit how this support mechanism I just mentioned earlier works. So, well, it's called feed support. And who can apply for this support? It's all commercial aircraft operator based in the EEA and outside the EEA that perform flights under the scope of the EU ETS. Flights that for which allowances have to be surrendered. This regulation is still in concept, so it's the exact rules are still they're still working on it at the European Commission. The timeline for this mechanism I can show you here. So during the reporting years, the airline uplifts eligible fuels for eligible routes. The airline reports the fuel use in the emission report. Together with the emissions report, the airline can apply for this ETS finance support. Then yearly, the Commission will publish the annual prices of the different fuels. And with that, the competent authority can calculate the amount of allowances that have to be, or that you will receive. Ultimately, you will receive this allocation of allowances. It's not following the normal compliance cycle, but you will receive these allowances probably only in September next year. And the following link you can click on later to follow the updates on this regulation in draft. So just some steps, again, how you can apply for this support. It first, again, starts with having an approved monitoring plan, describing all the correct procedures. Then you can report the amount of fuels in a separate memo item in your emissions report that you submit to the NEA. And afterwards, the NEA will calculate and transfer the allocation. And afterwards, you'll be asked to acknowledge the origin of those funds and also to ensure the feasibility of the union funding. And I already mentioned it before, but this similar requirements, as stated in the MRR, the RED II, and national law, are applicable as for the zero rating of alternative fuels and for this and for the use of eligible fuels. Here is some additional guidance. that you can after the presentation, if you have more, if you want to know more about this topic. Yeah. And with that, I would like to hand over the mic to my colleague Hannah, who's going to explain a little bit more about the CORSIA implementation in the EU.